So, so it sounds like the hat, wig, and the pants weren't the end of it. So how did it continue after that?
Right. I wanted to think, okay, just this, just this.
And
And
that's still 3 years into the marriage, right?
3 years in, 3 years
Okay.
in,
Okay.
and then I got pregnant and I had my first child. And I had, um, and then, motherhood became a way of defining me. And it felt like those issues, they took a back seat for a little while. I felt like, okay, we were Orthodox. I was going to send my son to an Orthodox school. We were going to follow this. But I feel like my questioning sort of became masked a little bit by being disengaged. It was easy not to go to synagogue every week because I had a baby. And it was easy to sort of be like, to sort of, motherhood became my new identity. And so I didn't have to wrestle with the questions as much. I also, at the same time, my first book came out and it was about the Orthodox Jewish world. And it was regarded by many as being critical of that world. And so all of a sudden I was this figure where, I was Orthodox in practice, but I was sort of regarded by many in the Orthodox world as a critic from within. And I was sort of iffy in that regard. And so for the first time, I had this sense of these private questions were being talked about publicly. And, I heard over and over again the accusation that I was airing the dirty laundry, or people in the Memphis Orthodox community were angry about the book. And they said, no one's going to want to move here now, or no one's going to, no one's gonna, I think that, was it good for the community or bad? My work of art was going to be judged in the terms of, again, good or bad. And, I hoped it was a more nuanced portrait, but it was only regarded as, was it nice or was it not nice?
It's reminding me of Chaim Potok. Like
Yes,
were you compared to Chaim Potok? And then
it was.
The whole Asher Lev book is about this
Oh,
art,
I love
right?
that book. That book for me, I was like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. That sense of art and religion and rule breaking, and what does it mean to push the boundaries, and what do you lose by pursuing your art? I mean, I read The Chosen in high school, and I saw the movie in high school, and for me, it was shocking. It was like, oh, it's my world on the screen. Other people are seeing my world, but I loved those books growing up.
But he was criticized, I'm sure. Chaim Potok
Absolutely.
was villainized for ruining Judaism, or
Right, or for presenting a story that didn't adhere to the official version. I think so much about how certainly this is true within Orthodoxy, I believe, but my guess is it's true in other religious worlds that there's an official version. There's a story that is told. And the story is, someone told this to me last week in a very mean Facebook post. Someone said to me, Orthodox Jews are happy. We do not write books because we do not have time to go on book tour. And I was like, huh, you think? And so another woman commented, correct. I was like, yes, correct. And that is the story, right? Orthodox Jews are happy. When you're inside, you're happy. And I feel this even when I was Orthodox, I felt, no, Orthodox Jews are human. All of the things, all of the questions and problems and struggles, same as anywhere. Religion does not protect you from being human with all of the things that happen to us in our lives. And that insistence over and over again. When I got it on my Facebook page last week after the book came out, I was like, oh, right, you again, that version, that story that, Orthodox Jews don't doubt. Orthodox Jews don't have marital issues. Orthodox Jews don't ever get depressed. Orthodox Jews aren't anxious. Orthodox Jews aren't questioning. I just feel like, for whom are we telling these lies? And I mean, I know what the lie does to you. It says to you, the one who is feeling that, you are the only one. And I think, I felt that my whole career as a writer, that my interest is opening up those human places and saying, of course we feel this way. Everyone feels this way. Everyone has these questions and struggles.
wow. Okay, so your role as an author starts making you uh, criticized by some. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you were held up and honored by
Yes.
some parts of your community,
Yes. It
and
was
then
both.
villainized by others, right?
Exactly. It was very much both at the same time.
And so, how did that end up affecting your faith journey?
I think for me, it created this sense that I was in this insider-outsider position. I was both at once, and so I was fully Orthodox. I after my second novel came out, there was a piece in the New York Times Book Review critiquing me and several other writers for writing negatively about Orthodox Judaism. And it was mortifying because I was Orthodox. I remember reading it right before I went to the mikvah, to the ritual bath. And, one of the things the mikvah lady said to me was, oh, I know your name. Why do I know your name from somewhere? And she's like, oh, I just read an article about you. And I was like, I bet you did, while she's checking my back to make sure there's no stray hairs on it. And it wasn't like she was right. I wasn't being critiqued about my portrayal of a world I had once belonged to. I actively lived in that world. And so it was that feeling of being uncomfortable inside my world, though, a feeling that I was this and yet I wasn't at the same time.
Wow, that's hitting home for me because my disciplinary counsel was covered in the New York Times, and
right.
I was active in the church when the church was excommunicating me. So it hits home.
Right. In the New York Times, it said about me that I was an insider outsider, that I pretended to be Orthodox. And it said that, this writer who was newly Orthodox and sort of had the fervor of someone who had become this, the thing she was angriest about in my second novel was that I portrayed a strictly religious Orthodox couple who were engaged, and so they had never touched each other. But there was this moment when the fiance sort of touches her and leans in for a hug, and he was sort of caught with this between his desire and his sense of the rules. And certainly a moment I've experienced. It happens all the time. And she was like, she said, everyone knows that an Orthodox boy would never hug his fiance. And I was like, no, everyone knows that an Orthodox boy feels he should not hug his fiance, but he is a human being. He's a 21-year-old and he wants to. And he is caught between his desire and his belief. And that's the real story. And, it was mortifying. I was infuriated by the piece. I ended up writing this response, but it was that sense that I don't belong to this world really, or at least to her version of the world.
You're a truth teller, Tova, and that gets you in trouble.
It does. It's right. It's yes. And I think that, for me as a writer, telling the truth is the thing, but I once heard a quote, someone said, do you want to know what I think or do you want to know what I really think? And I feel like in my world, it's just tell us what you think. I don't really want to know what you really think.
I love that. Okay. In Mormonism, there's the term wolf in sheep's clothing. So this outsider insider, did you get labeled with equivalent sort of negative labels?
Yeah. I was viewed as like, at every book talk I did, someone would always ask me the question, are you still Orthodox? And I would always be like, why do they say still? What do they know? I'd always say I'm a liberal, feminist, pluralist, modern Orthodox Jew, whatever that means. I would kind of play it for a laugh because I didn't know how to really answer it. But I felt, in my practice, I was fully Orthodox. I would never eat something that was not certified kosher. I would never break the Sabbath, but I observed that my children were being raised in an Orthodox environment. I went to the mikvah, sort of the full, normative Orthodox Judaism. But in my work, I think people were aware of the questions I was asking.
Yeah. And so I imagine that over time, it can be exhilarating. Like I'm plotting new ground. I'm speaking the truth. I'm trying to create this new space for a new generation, and we can change and we can do better. I know a lot of the early years of my activism had this spirit of excitement and of change,
Mm-hmm.
but I wonder if it was also tinged with the wonderment on your part of whether it was sustainable.
Right. I think what was interesting was I felt like my activism, I was part of an Orthodox feminist world. I was not particularly at the forefront of it. I was, supportive of it and was somewhat involved. I felt like my activism was on the notion that there was an internal life in the Orthodox world. I think that was what people weren't upset because I was advocating for women to be rabbis or women to take on greater roles. That wasn't that religiously involved. I think people were angry at me because I was saying that not everyone believes as they're supposed to, or not everyone has a perfect family, or not, or saying, yes, a yeshiva boy, a religious boy does hug his fiance, at least it does far more than that, or he wants to, or an Orthodox boy has desire, or an Orthodox married woman has a fantasy. That idea was very, very problematic for people. And the idea that within the law, there was a subjective experience that I wanted to give voice to. And for some people, that was intolerable.
All right. So 2 books down, how did it progress in your life and in your marriage?
Right. 2 books down. I've got 2 kids, trying to hold it together. With my then husband, there were we moved to Boston, to the Orthodox community here, where I felt that tighter sense of community. When I lived in New York City, it felt a little more loose about what community meant. But we moved into an Orthodox neighborhood, bought a house, went to the Orthodox synagogue. And again, that same sense of, I'm going to try to be this. The article I was referring to came out like a few months after we moved in. And I was like, oh, that's not going to make it easier to make friends here. But, I was sort of I was like, oh, we know who she is. And, trying to hold it together, trying very hard to be who I was supposed to be. And I was writing about doubt more. I felt, but I also felt very blocked as a writer sometimes because I, felt afraid. I would write these stories. I had this idea for a short story collection called Transgressive Girls. And I wanted to write about, girls who push the edge. I was sort of coming at it through fiction, always with this sort of self-delusional notion of, oh, it's just the characters. It's not really me. I'm going to write about these characters who push up against the boundaries. But I was growing disillusioned. And I think the way I managed disillusionment was by being disengaged. I would go to synagogue. I would cook Friday night dinner. I would do the holidays, but I wasn't particularly engaged in it. One of the things I did for years and years was I prayed every morning. There's sort of a service you say, and you can go to synagogue and say it, but you could just say it yourself. And I considered myself obligated to do it. And somewhere around the birth of my second child, I stopped praying every morning. I just didn't really want to. I felt like I was just reciting words. Maybe it fell away just by the busyness of life with small children. And then I stopped feeling connected. So I began to have the experience, maybe what you referenced earlier, being orthopraxic, that I observed fully, but I knew my heart wasn't really there. But I thought, I just somehow had this idea that I could make it through unscathed. I thought if nothing shook my faith, if nothing bothered me enough, if I didn't read Jewish, non-Orthodox Jewish feminism, if I didn't expose myself to things, somehow I could just manage to stay within and get through to some imagined other side. If I didn't want to, I knew my whole life was built on this. And I was terrified of what would happen if I questioned the foundations.
Okay, I'm looking at the time, and I know we're going to have much more interview than what we're going to have time for. So tell me what time you have to hang up the phone.
Okay, so it's my time. So I have another 45 minutes.
Okay, good. All right, so good.
And will you forgive me if I walk you back up the stairs to go get my computer charger? Sorry for the movement.
Not at all.
Hiding the mess that you're going to pass by.
Don't worry about it. This is I'm so grateful. You're so generous, and this is so profound. And lots of listeners our audience is actually growing on the internet, which is rare to be almost 2.5 hours in to an interview, and our audience is growing. Okay. So Mormons are loving this. So
okay, hello, I'm getting the charger. Sorry, I feel highly.
Don't worry. Okay. So all right, so you're continuing with the orthopraxy at this point. You've had 2 kids, you've had 2 books, but you're not in it spiritually. You're not in it mentally, and you're starting to wonder if you can just kind of hang on and survive at this point.
Exactly, make it through somehow. Just sort of don't let anything shake me from being part of it, because to be shaken from it is to potentially upend my life, which the thought of it is terrifying, really. So we're just going to plug in the computer.
No, it's completely, okay. Mormons will relate this. The idea of leaving Mormonism is terrifying. And, this idea of community is the God. I don't think that's fully permeated Mormonism as a meme, but I think it should, and it hopefully will, because I don't even think Mormons are as conscious about how much community is really at the core of people's commitment to the church.
Community is everything. Yeah, community. Yeah. I felt like community. I feel like if you told everyone okay, God doesn't exist, but can we carry on? I feel like many people would be like, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So then how do you go from sort of starting to die inside, but still observant to things really becoming a problem?
Right. And so for the next number of years, I had a 3rd child, and I was working on a 3rd book. I was very stuck in writing the book. I really I decided I was going to write a book that was not Jewish in nature. My first 2 books really dealt with questions of belief and doubt and community. I think that I was used up from these questions. I wanted to write something else. Maybe my own disengagement made me want to feel that at least in my writing, I could go somewhere else. At least in the fictional world I was creating, I could create some place of freedom for myself. So I wrote my third novel, Visible City, is not religious at all. And it felt like a refuge in some ways. But even there, I couldn't finish the book. It was this strange thing. Like my first book took 3 years and my second book took 4 years. And, this book, I'm on year 5, I'm on year 6, I'm on year 7. And I kept writing it and I wrote every day. Couldn't finish it. And I would get feedback from people. And I was writing about marital unhappiness. I didn't know I was writing about that when I started, but I was writing about a woman who watches her neighbors out her window. And in the early versions of the book, she watches them and she sort of lives through their lives, but she doesn't, and she's unhappy, but she doesn't do anything about it. And she comes to the conclusion in the early draft that it's enough to live inside your mind. It's enough to watch other people and to have your own sort of fantasy world, but you can stay in that same small box of your own life. And readers would say, I gave it to a few people to read, and everyone had the same response, that it's unsatisfying. Nothing happens. Nothing is at stake here. And I couldn't hear it. I didn't know what to do about it. And I used to think to myself, well, I'm writing realistic fiction. No one does anything about their lives. Doesn't everyone just like ruminate and think about what's wrong, but no one actually acts? And the idea that someone could act, like a character could do something, I was like, oh, that's non-realistic fiction. I don't do that kind of thing. And that idea, the idea that you could change, I was like, no. And so, a decade, I think back, I can't believe how many years it was, but years and years went by, and I was sad. I was busy with my children. I loved, being a mother. I was, deeply involved with them. My marriage sort of had evolved into the point where I felt alone, but I also felt like, very much this feeling of, okay, I can take care of, I can do this myself, I've got the kids, I've got this, I felt like just try harder, be the person who can do everything. And I felt like, we weren't fighting about the hard issues because we weren't talking about them. I think that neither of us are probably confrontational by nature, and it was easier to ignore them. So we would sometimes I would sometimes say things like, I don't know if I want to be Orthodox, or I would say, I think Orthodoxy is misogynist. And, one time my husband said to me, meaning well, he said, I know it's misogynist, but I want to be Orthodox anyway. And, I understood it, but for me, that sentence, I felt like there's nothing to say after this. And that was the end of the conversation. It didn't go beyond that. And I felt that sense. I felt like, every marriage has the rules you create with each other. And I think the rules we created with each other was that I could be unhappy and I could feel dissatisfied. I could think about them and I could write about them as long as I didn't do anything about them. And that was my own, I don't fault him for that. It was my own guiding principle as well. Think about it. Don't act on anything. And, my mantra through those years, when I would be upset, I would tell myself, nothing can change. I felt like I had married into this world. I was born into it. I was raising 3 children in it. I had a house in the Orthodox community in this town, Boston suburb. It was too late. I was 37, 38 years old. And it's too late to change, I thought. I had already become who I was supposed to be. And I just, it felt like being poised on the edge of a cliff for a long time, this sense that too late to change, too late. And I think I'm 38, it's too late. The counter voice would say like, I'm only 38. Is it really too late to change? But it felt like it was for a long time. But
it
it
almost
felt like
sounds like Moses wandering in the wilderness.
Right, exactly. My 40 years in the desert. That sense of being lost. It felt like, the sense that I would ask myself, well, what would it mean not to be Orthodox? What would that even look like? And, sometimes we would talk about it. We would say, well, there was a egalitarian synagogue that met near our house. And we would say, I could go to that as long as the we of the family remained Orthodox. I could sort of be like, oh, they're Orthodox. Tova's a little on the edge, but they're Orthodox. And I never wanted to do it. It wasn't enough of an answer to just sort of that I could have these little moments when I didn't have to fully be Orthodox, or I could sort of have these forays out of the community as long as I was willing to raise my children inside of it.
Yeah. So this period of wilderness and just feeling stuck, that's got to be depressing. I mean, that's almost the definition of depression, right?
Right. Being stuck, being unable to foresee the possibility that you can change.
Yeah. So what broke through? How did you break out of that?
Mhm. So I felt the pressure increasing inside myself. I felt like for so long I had been unable to know for myself that this was problematic. But I finally, I think maybe it was age, maybe it was that small voice was so loud inside my head. But I started having little tiny experimental forays. And so, one of them was, I sort of laugh at it now, but sushi is considered like the gateway food in Orthodoxy because it's not because it's raw. It's, technically like a salmon avocado roll is technically, the ingredients are kosher. It's not certified kosher, but some people who are in the Orthodox world will eat that even though it's not technically kosher. We didn't do that, but I would be at the grocery store and I would buy a thing of sushi and I would like hide it in my cart, and then I would eat it in my car and I would throw the wrapping away like in a different garbage can. And I felt like, I both could see myself from the inside and the outside thinking, oh, very radical, I'm eating sushi. It's not certified kosher. But again, it's one of those moments of realizing I can break a rule, and I'm okay with it. And those built up. I think my marriage, separate from the religious questions, was having a very, very hard time with issues of emotional connection, and a sense of partnership, I think, was very, very hard in our marriage. And I felt increasingly alone. And, the religion was a part of that. It also had its own separate piece of not feeling that sense of partnership. And, as the dial got turned up on each one, I really became aware that I was really at the edge. Our marriage was sort of taking on elements of estrangement, where on the surface it looked fine. I would smile when I was supposed to, but internally was, really felt cut off completely. And at the same time, some of the religious issues were becoming heightened. One particular way, again, it was around my writing, but I was struggling with my book and with the sense of needing freedom. I wanted to have once I realized what was wrong with my third novel, I, had to ask myself, can these characters make a change? Do they have the courage to do something different in their lives? And I became aware that I didn't think I was writing autobiographically, but it became clear of how deeply autobiographically I was writing. And then I had a moment that I felt like was really a turning point moment for me from a religious perspective. I was invited to speak at a conference of rabbis. It was called the Orthodox Forum, and it was a modern Orthodox gathering where every year 100 rabbis would discuss issues of importance to the Orthodox world. They discussed rabbinic authority one year, or relationship between the Orthodox world and the non-Orthodox world. And this year they were discussing culture, like Orthodox culture. And
now, what year would this have been about?
Let's see, this would have been about 2011.
Okay. All right. So about 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Right.
So I was invited to speak to this conference, as one of the panels was going to be with several Orthodox artists. And so I was invited to speak on the panel, and we were given a series of questions to answer beforehand. And they were questions like, is it a conflict to be an Orthodox artist? Can you create within an Orthodox environment of religious law? Are there challenges? And in the first draft of those essays, I gave the answers that I knew they wanted to hear. I said that, maybe there were some challenges, but they could coexist. I said that you could be Orthodox and you could be an artist. I said that Judaism encouraged questioning. I didn't give my second half of the answer that, as long as you accept the answers. I wanted to tell them, don't be afraid of art. I wanted to say, art comes in peace, nothing to fear. I wanted there to be greater comfort with the arts in the Orthodox world. And I wanted to be an example of that and say, it's okay to teach our kids art. It's okay to be exposed to secular culture. It doesn't have to take away from your orthodoxy. I sent back the answers. And then a few weeks later, they asked me if I would come speak at the conference, based on those answers. And I said I would. And then I looked back at the answers I'd written, and, I hated myself for them. I felt like it was a lie. I also read the other responders as comments, and I hated their answers too. I felt like we were lying. I felt like to say, oh, there's a small conflict, no big deal, was not true. And I felt like I did not want to be someone who spoke dishonestly and required the people around me to be dishonest as well. So I emailed the organizer and I said, can I revise my answers? And I wrote what I thought. And it was, this one of those, part of the pleasure of being a writer is when you really tap into your own internal freedom to say what you really think. And, in writing those answers, I decided I was just going to say what I thought. And if they didn't like them, then that was fine. But, one of the things I said was, they asked if you would be willing to, do you feel you have to get rabbinic permission for some of your scenes? Do you feel like you need to ask a religious question about some of the permissibility of your art? And I said, no. I said, I won't. I said, I was on a roll at this point. I was really trying to go after it, to really be honest. And I said, what would I do? Like, show a sex scene to a rabbi and ask if it was okay? And then if he said it wasn't okay, take it out of a book? Who was in charge? Who had authority over my artistic creation? And regardless of whether Orthodoxy says it was supposed to have authority, I knew that my answer was no. I have authority over my artistic creations, not the religious world. And so I went to speak at the conference, concerned, because I knew that I had been honest in a way, in a nonfiction form and in a personal sense, different than I had been. But I reached the point where I just felt it had become impossible to write something I did not believe. I could no longer speak something I did not think that was true. And it just became clear to me that I was either going to stop being a writer or I was going to be really honest. And I went to this conference and got grilled by the rabbis, and many were very upset by what I said. But I said that I did not consider myself under rabbinic authority when it came to my art. And, with each question, each sort of digging in on me about whether, was this idolatry I was describing? Was there no one in charge? Were there boundaries? Who set the boundaries? One rabbi said, who was I to decide that I didn't have to ask rabbinic questions? He actually said, if you had a talent for running a brothel, would that be okay as well? And I was like, brothel? I felt like my fiction was so tame. I was like, if only, that were the problem. Like, I was like struggling to be free and to write a sex scene in the first place. And I remember standing there before the rabbis, and it just, that same no, like that little quiet no that I had heard as a child, it filled me. It was this no, like, no, I don't believe in this. And no, I don't, their intention was they wanted to create a world that kept people inside. And what I said was, art is dangerous. Art opens boxes and it opens doors. And that is just the truth of it. Art is not here to make you feel better about yourself. It is here to ask questions. And as an artist, that's what I'm here for too. And, one of the ironies was that the conference took place, and it was at Yeshiva University. And the conference took place in the room that happened to be housing the student art show. And there was a big slogan behind me. It said, think outside the box. And I was like, you say that as a slogan and not mean it. I said, because when you think outside the box, you might change and you might not agree with what you were supposed to think. And when you allow yourself freedom to think, there are lots of possibilities that can happen. And I understood they didn't want those possibilities, but I knew I could no longer be part of a world that was intent on keeping you within that box and pretending that they wanted you to think outside the box. And I think that moment was really the last time I would have ever considered myself Orthodox. I think I knew with a certainty that was undeniable for me at that point that I was no longer Orthodox.
So what do you do when you come home from that? What do you do when you come home from that event and you're married to an Orthodox man and you're living in an Orthodox community and your parents and in-laws are Orthodox and you're raising your kids Orthodox?
Everyone. Right. And what do you do when that voice is not going to be quiet anymore? I think it took how many decades to reach that point. But, I was about to turn 40 and it reached the point where it was undeniable. And, I think sometimes there's the cost of leaving. And I knew I would worry about that. I would keep myself awake at night worrying what would happen if I left. But there's a cost to staying. There is a cost to being someone you are not. And there's a cost to being inauthentic. And I came to understand that the cost of inauthenticity and dishonesty was far greater than the cost of leaving. And I knew, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever known, but I knew that I was going to change. I knew it, that the time had come. And it started small, I think because the world that I lived in was made of small rules. It started with a very small infraction on a Friday night. I went upstairs to my big breakout moment happened while locked in the bathroom. but I sort of smuggled my cell phone upstairs in my sweatshirt pocket right after we had finished having Shabbat dinner, Friday night dinner. And I turned my phone on, I checked my email, again, like tiny in the scheme of things. But for me, it was a moment of, it was saying, it's not just that I can break the rules like pants and hair covering that are fungible and sushi is iffy. A phone on the Sabbath is a break. And I looked at my phone, I'm like, do I have it in me to do this? Turned it on. And I was like, I do, because I don't believe in it. And I think when I came to realize, that question, every time I would try to make myself adhere to the rules, it wasn't like, oh, I believe in it, but I really just want to check my email, or like, I believe in it, but I want to eat the tofu. It wasn't out of desire. It was this sense of, do I believe it's true? And I eventually came to know that, the answer was no, I don't. I did not believe in a God who commanded rules that he gave to just my particular world that were required of me, and that there was a goodness or badness associated with whether I ate the tofu or checked the cell phone. And it's everything. It changes your entire notion of truth and goodness. But that moment, locked in a bathroom, flushed the toilet so no one would know where I was. My husband wouldn't wonder what was going on. Just felt like one of those private moments of reckoning, of knowing that, it was awful to think about it. It was terrifying. I felt like I was smashing the little world that I held. But in the same way that, not covering my hair was empowering, it felt like saying, I'm going to become myself. I'm going to listen to my own voice, and it will cost and it will hurt and there will be pain to go around for all of us, but I can't be inauthentic anymore.
So how and when did you come out to your husband? And was he the first person you came out to?
I told him, I had a close friend who was Jewish but not Orthodox, and I would confide in her. I would tell her that growing sense. I would talk to my mother about it a little bit. I talked to a few friends, but always very masked. I would say, oh, I'm struggling with it. I don't know. But, one of the things about Orthodoxy is people don't talk about belief a lot. It's really not, if I were to start talking to my Orthodox friends about God, I think they would look at me askance. It was sort of like, almost like awkward to bring up God. I could talk about how I'm cooking for the holidays and I'm doing this and I'm, what are you doing for Shabbat? And I can meet you at synagogue and sit next to you. But to say like, I'm questioning like whether there's a God who commands, would have been like, oh, what's she thinking about? It was much more practical.
Because they don't think it's important, or because they think it's a dangerous topic, or because they think, like why is it, or because it's not useful to talk about belief?
Right. It's funny how I think it's because it's sort of the assumed as the foundation, but it's just not, it's almost like awkward. It's almost like too personal or too, as odd as it's going to sound, it's almost like too religious to talk about God. Like it's much easier to talk about law. There was some weirdness to it where like we observe, but like belief was like, put you in like a sort of hippie spiritual place that, my Orthodoxy was not like that. And so so I told my husband, I told him, by the time I told him though, our marriage was already in a very dangerous place. It was really, we were going to couples therapy. It was already, I think by the time I told him it, I was already past the point of no return emotionally. When I look back, if I could have told him years earlier, but we did not have the kind of marriage where we could deal with hard subjects. We had a marriage that worked well when things were fine, but when things were hard, together we did not have the ability to deal with something that was this complicated.
Yeah, and you refer to this earlier, and it's one of the things I see. Mm-hmm. There's this point where the believer loses their belief and the Orthodox person stays Orthodox. And in terms of emotional intimacy, it's just like this. And the longer you stay married, you just become more and more alienated from each other emotionally, and your intimacy dies. And you can stay married, but the marriage in some ways is dead. Right. And it's just a matter of how long you want to stay in an emotionally dead marriage, right?
Right. I think what happened was I became aware that the me I was trying to become, like the more honest, authentic self, was a threat. And the feeling that when you are with the person who's supposed to know you best and love you best of all, regards your true self as threatening, as dangerous, I don't know how to be intimate in that way, because I viewed myself that way. I felt like I was a danger, that myself, this self I was trying to craft, that was authentic and that had integrity about belief, that self was going to destruct the thing I was supposed to uphold. And, I would see it in my husband's eyes. I would see the sense that I was dangerous. And I think whatever was left of our marriage by that point really ended with my recognition that I was a danger.
So was that in 2011 where you knew the marriage was over? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I did know. And it was not only about religion. I mean, there were other issues going on as well that between us that were very, very hard, that we did not deal well. We didn't deal well with family issues together. We didn't deal well with division of labor. We didn't deal well with those things. And so we went to couples therapy, and the couples therapist always wanted to talk about religion. And the idea was that if we would just make a few changes, maybe religiously, then I would be fine. If we make some laxities. So, the one issue that, if you go to a hotel for a weekend, you can't use a card key on the Sabbath because it's electronic. And so what do? You have to hint to the hotel person to come open your door. And I would always be bothered by this. And so it was like, what if you agreed that you could just use the card key on the Sabbath? And by that point, I was like, no, it's not about that. It's not about, fine, we'll go to a sushi restaurant together, which he was offering to do. I think he was trying to make it better. It was so far past the question of, can we be a little less stringent in our observance? It was, what happens when the self I have become no longer fits inside the structure we have created? At that point, it was over before it was over.
But you did go to therapy and you tried. You had a lot of other issues. That makes perfect sense. So what year were you divorced?
Let's see. We were divorced in, I think it was 2012.
Okay. So there
About
wasn't,
a year.
so there wasn't this, so was there a moment of coming out to him and then trying to, or by the time you actually came out, it was over?
It was no direct coming out. It was clear that I was religiously upset and on the edge. I don't think that even in our divorce, it wasn't clear, well, how far was I going to go? How non-religious was I not going to be? And, by that point, because there was no more conversation that could happen without it being a fight or an argument, I didn't share that anymore of the religious questions.
Wow. So, I mean, isn't it amazing how a religion can come between a married couple, the person you're supposed to be the most close to,
right,
where you just, the most important and obvious thing that bound you together, that's causing you all this torment, that's this huge, massive elephant in the room, you don't talk about it.
Right. And because I think what was so hard was to realize that the thing I felt strangled by, the thing I wanted to escape, was the exact same thing he wanted. So, I felt terribly guilty about the divorce. I still do sometimes, that sense that I had changed. What was sort of hurled at me again and again was, you've changed. And how could I? It was true. I had changed. I had. And the thing that was so hard to realize was that, a few times, he guys said, we don't have to be Orthodox, but I realized the thing you want this world. This is the world you believe in and you want. And it's the world I need to leave. And so it wasn't a question of, I'll become less strict. We don't have to be this way. You are something and want something that makes me feel imprisoned. And there was no getting beyond that question.
So what about the option of being in a mixed faith marriage at that point? That's what we call it Mormonism,
right,
where he's Orthodox and you're not.
I know people who do that. I mean, it's interesting. I am remarried right now to someone who describes himself as Jewish, and he's completely secular. And, and even though I'm still connected to the Jewish world in many ways, I wouldn't describe myself as religious. But I go to synagogue for the holidays and observe the holidays, but I do them without my husband because he doesn't want that. And I am the last person who's going to force anyone else to be religious. And, I feel like, what irony would that be? But so there we navigate, maybe it's what you would describe as a mixed faith, but I'm not, because I'm in this sort of wiggle room place, it's easier to do it. I felt like with Orthodoxy, we could have done that if I were willing to bend, if I were willing to sort of, we would still keep kosher, of course, like the kitchen would still be kosher, and we would still keep Shabbat, the Sabbath, of course, because my husband wouldn't go anywhere on the Sabbath. So I privately could eat my sushi and my tofu, but it was still who we were. And, I think it can work when both sides are able to accept the other person for who they are, who they become. When both people are able to make room for the fact that who you are is not who I am. And I think when it's regarded as, well, you've changed for the bad and I hold on to the good, then I think it's very hard. But when both people are able to reconcile the fact that, like, people believe differently, and I love you and you believe differently, and I'm going to enable you to believe differently and still be together. In my marriage, it wasn't the kind of conversation we could have.
I mean, I come from a divorced family, so I have this bias of wanting every marriage to stay together. So even though your divorce has already happened, I'm thinking in my mind, now, wait a minute.
Can you save it, right?
Tova, wait, no, talk to him, tell him,
right.
I want the marriage to stay together. I'm not going to be Orthodox anymore, but you be you and I'll be me, and you observe Sabbath and you go to temple, but I won't. We'll both and this is what I do as a profession. I got my PhD in psychology, and I'm all about helping a mixed faith marriage stay together. And it's all about helping them learn to respect each other, helping them empower each other in their decisions, that these differences can actually be a sign of strength in your relationship.
Right. Exactly.
And that a kid raised with both perspectives gives them a chance to entertain both paths. And so there's a part of me that wants to still fight for that marriage.
Still root for it, right?
Yeah.
No, I understand. When I think back to the past, I understand there's a part of me that has that wish, that fantasy or wish of it. I think you have to have the foundation in a marriage, that you have to have that ability to talk about the hard subjects, because this is a really hard one. I mean, this is not just like, are we going to observe the Passover Seders? This is, did you buy the soy sauce that had the certification on it? Oh, you didn't buy the one, then you ruined the pots in the kitchen. This is, do we let the kids eat, go out with their, go get pizza at the local place? Do we, on Saturday, did you tear the toilet paper or not? This is everything. So, or in a marriage.
Tear the toilet paper?
You can't tear,
How do you wipe if you can't tear
tissues,
the toilet?
Kleenex.
Oh my gosh.
Or some people tear them beforehand.
Moly.
Right. It's everywhere. Or, like, for example, let's say I didn't want to be Orthodox anymore, but would I not go to the mikvah? If I were not going to go to the mikvah, then we wouldn't have no sex life anymore. That was not in physical.
Because he wouldn't have sex with you if you didn't go to the mikvah.
So would I still be required to do that?
You'd be unclean from his perspective.
Right. Unpermitted to him. Who would our community be? I think what would have happened was I would have done it on the sly. So if I were willing, someone emailed me recently saying, well, I don't understand why you couldn't be Orthodox. Everyone she had been part of the same Orthodox community I was. And she said, everyone in Newton ate out in non-kosher restaurants. We just did it in the next town over. You could have done that too. And I said, but I don't want to live that way. I don't want to hide. I don't want to pretend and be something quietly. And, I also think that, if our marriage had been stronger, we could have done it. I think that the other issues in the marriage made it impossible to have this conversation, and our personalities and just the differences between us that were there that came out in this way. So I do feel that if we had a stronger base and a stronger ability to deal with hard things, maybe there was a better chance.
Have you seen it happen with other Orthodox couples where they are able to, or is it pretty much unheard of?
I have heard of people doing it. I think it's hard. I mean, I do know people who talk about it. I know that there's differences in religiosity. And I do think people navigate it in different ways. I don't think it's simple.
Yeah.
And in your world, are people able to navigate the mixed faith?
It sounds like it's easier. I mean, I just had a commenter write, Michelle wrote, this makes Mormonism look easy. So I don't think the Mormons that I know who are in a mixed faith marriage, including some people very close to me, I don't think they think of it as easy. I think they think of it as excruciating and as almost fatal.
Right. And I guess also the question becomes with your children, like, do you raise your children? If you decide you don't believe in something, do you then raise your children with the beliefs that you don't believe in? Are you required to teach your children something you don't think? And that, I think, is, even in a divorce, that question comes up, but that's a hard question.
Yeah. Okay, we've got 10 more minutes. How many more minutes do we have?
I've got till 1:50. I've got till 1:40.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay. Wow. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I have a radio interview at 2:00. I just need a few minutes between them, but I'm good.
Okay, so we've got another 20 minutes. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
25.
Okay. So do you have a sense for divorce rates in Orthodox? Because in Mormonism, the divorce rate is comparable to the non-Mormon divorce rate. So I don't think divorce is as big of a deal in Mormonism as it might be in Orthodoxy. Do you have a sense for the divorce rate?
I don't have a sense. I don't have numbers. I would just say anecdotally, I do think that it's much less common. I do think that it's, far more rare in the Orthodox world. That, it's certainly communally, it's becoming more common, but I think it's far lower than the mainstream rates.
So what was it like to go through that divorce process in Orthodox Judaism?
It reminded me of the ways that what is private is also public in a community. And so I felt very much that it was not just that my then husband and I were getting divorced, that we had reached an impasse, and that I needed to do this. I felt like it was played out in our synagogue and in our community. And I think it was really one of the most painful parts of the story for me. I became aware very quickly of how people choose sides, and how, you don't just divide your property in a divorce, but you divide friends. And it was really, maybe I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was. It was enormously painful for me to realize that the people who I had considered friends were uncomfortable around me, or were not going to speak to me. Or I would get this sort of like, little hellos in the grocery store letting me know that I was now someone who was uncomfortable. And I think there are certainly many people in the Orthodox, in our community, who had gotten divorced. I don't think it was only about the divorce, but also because it was sort of clear that I was no longer going to synagogue and that I was no longer going to the Orthodox.
So you lost friends.
Lots of friends.
I imagine you started feeling a sense of shame whenever you'd walk out in public and start seeing people.
It would only be when I would run into people I used to know. I would have, and at first I did not realize that this was a thing. I didn't realize that people weren't going to say hi to me anymore. And it was on the level of good friends, but really on the level of just sort of like the women I would see in synagogue every week. Like I wasn't even necessarily sure of their names, but like I knew them and they knew me. And I just sort of became aware. I remember the first time I was in the grocery store and I passed someone, and I sort of started to say hi, and I just saw the look away, and it wasn't everyone, and but it was certainly, someone said to me, "Oh, maybe it was just one or two people." And I was like, No, it was not just one or two people. It was, and I think maybe we respond to things because things make us uncomfortable. I certainly know that feeling of, oh God, I don't want to wade into whatever's going on there, but I think divorce and certainly religious change make people enormously uncomfortable and feel threatened. But it was really, it was really hard to feel that there was, there was a public opinion about my divorce. One of the people who had been my former best friend in the Orthodox community, she and her husband chose my husband's side, and they really actively befriended him. And she told me that that people would come to her, wanting to know the scoop. She was the one in the know, and they would say, well, what's going on with Tova? What's that about? And she would tell them that, oh, well, Tova doesn't come to synagogue anymore because she thinks people are judging her. And I was like, what a lovely thing to say. This sense of it, this feeling of that somehow I was being pushed further to the outs. And, that loss of that, that felt like a betrayal of a close friendship. And I think that probably was one of the hardest parts of it, that sense that this person who had been my confidant and closest friend, she said to me, I told your husband everything you said, that I felt like we weren't friends anymore. So I was entitled to tell him everything. I was like, that's quite a definition of friendship.
There's also in Mormonism this idea that believers want to say that someone loses their faith because they were offended, because they never believed in the first place, because they wanted to sin, they wanted to break some rule. And so they, instead of taking the questions seriously, they try and write it off to something superficial.
Right. The thing was, oh, she must be crazy. Like that was the idea that, I was crazy. And I was like, you're not going to be able to pin that one on me. A lot of people, they do pin it on. I was like, I'm just not going to you're just going to have a hard time saying I'm crazy. But people said, oh, I heard she came home one day and out of the blue said she wanted a divorce. And it's such a denial of your right to your own story. It's such an attempt to say, we know the truth about your divorce and you are not entitled to tell it. And in writing my memoir, one of the things I thought a lot about is, no one gets to tell our stories for us. No one owns our story and no one has the right to determine what it is. And I certainly, as a writer, I felt like, no, I do have my own version of this story. And I think people are threatened, people don't know how to talk about these things. They're uncomfortable. I'm sure people felt like, well, he was still going to the synagogue. And so it was easier to be friendly to him because he was still inside. And I was, about coming anymore and what was my story. But the idea of, that I was somehow, that I had to be maligned in order for him to be all good, I had to be all bad. There couldn't be it couldn't be a complicated story. It couldn't be, they weren't able to be together, or she believes differently. It couldn't be that I had grappled over a lifetime. It had to be like, oh, what does she want to do now, kind of thing. It had to be viewed in the most, cynical or dismissive terms, as opposed to like, isn't it important to grapple with what you really believe? Isn't it actually valuable to examine who you are and who you want to be?
And you've already answered this, but I'm asking you one last time, because it is the question in sort of liberal progressive Mormonism. Why not just stay, but not believe, and just say, my participation is not literal. I disagree with the social problems in the church. I don't believe it anymore, but this is my tribe. This is my community.
Right.
And I'm going to do it, because it's a home for me, and it's my path. You don't have to believe it's the path anymore. You could just be this universalist, Unitarian, Orthodox Jew that does it out of a commitment to the community and out of a feeling that it's good for you and the family, even if it's not what you literally believe. And maybe you won't obey everything. You'll just obey the parts that you've already answered this, but I want you to answer it one more time.
It's interesting to hear, because I feel like that question is so relevant in terms of in my own world. And I think, I used to always have this like fantasy that I was going to like take a survey. I was going to say like stand up in synagogue and say, okay, everyone put your heads down, show of hands. Who really believes, or who likes community, who likes tradition? And I think many people, I think there's a lot of value to exactly what you're saying, that sense that I connect here. I enjoy community. I enjoy tradition. My parents are in this world. And so I think for many people that works. For me, I couldn't make that work. First of all, because you don't get to say, honestly, I don't believe in this, but I'm doing it anyway. There's a pretense of belief. And that for me required a level of dishonesty that felt really hard. Also because I think that living with rules you don't believe in is not just like there's a gain to it and no loss. It cuts into your sense of self and autonomy, into freedom. And also because Orthodoxy is so rule-based, it wouldn't be like, I do the holidays now. I love doing them with my parents. I do it with my kids. We have, Sabbath dinner together. I feel very connected to Jewish history and Jewish culture. But there's a difference between that and saying, I need to go to this thing. It starts at 5:00 on a Saturday, but I'm not going to go because I don't do that, because I don't drive until 7. And why don't I? Because God told me to. That sense that it cuts across every moment. And so having to observe things, in every hour of every day that I don't believe in feels like living falseness to me. And so I feel like, I think what I do now is I connect parts of it and still am engaged. I would still consider myself, an engaged Jew and involved, but it's not with that layer of pretense and pretending to be something for the sake of upholding. And also, I don't want to teach my children those same lessons about good and bad. I don't want to raise them to feel, I don't want my 9-year-old daughter to feel like, oh, you're wearing sleeveless today. Like, oh, that's bad. I don't want those messages to be written across her body as well.
That is a major dilemma. But her dad is still devout, and so your kids are gonna get half your messages and half his, right?
Right. I mean, part of divorce is that there's no longer a single notion of family. There's a fractured notion. There's families, and we're all sort of an overlapping family. But they learn a message that there are different ways to be, and there are different ways to be Jewish, and there are different ways to live in the world. And it's a hard message. It's a complicated, it's a mixed blessing for them to get that message. It comes with confusion, but it also comes with a truth about the world, that they learn that we make choices about what we believe, that you don't have to only be one way, and you don't have to live the way you were raised, and that you too will get the opportunity as you get older to ask yourself what you really believe, and you eventually, increasingly, will live according to your own beliefs. And so my kids do live in different worlds. And my oldest son, is in Israel for a year right now. He just graduated from high school, and he is part of an Orthodox community. And I feel my obligation and my desire as a mom is to enable him to be part of a world he's choosing. And so, an example of that is my kitchen is still strictly kosher. I do all the same rules I described because I want my family to eat in my house. Of course, my son, but my parents and my siblings, I want to try to have as wide of a, most inclusive of a world as possible. So I keep things as much the same so that I can include the most amount of people in that world.
Wow. So you're observing a lot of Orthodox Judaism to keep peace with your own children.
Right, I am. I want he's my son. I would never, ever do anything that would make it harder for him. And so I feel like I want to look for ways to, and it's part of the challenge of family, of how we say, part of parenting, I've sort of just coming of age as a mother, of having the first child leave the house. So much of being a young parent is about wanting to hold on to your kids, wanting to shape their world and teach them. And I remember the first time my oldest son came home from nursery school, having learned a song I didn't teach him. It was like shocking that he could know a world I didn't teach him. But, part of parenting is letting go. And I, miss my son. I just was talking to him this morning, and I thought, God, I miss you. You've been gone since September. And, the hard, painful part of parenting is coming to accept that our kids are their own people, and they have the right to choose. And I think I know it as a daughter and a mother. And I feel like my job is to help my kids choose authentically and choose with integrity, to make educated choices. It's not my job to choose their beliefs. Even if I thought it was my job, I don't get that. It's not our choice as parents.
So is there a part of you that's scared that your kids may choose Orthodoxy?
I'm not scared of it. I feel like my oldest son has chosen that, if that's what he wants to be. And I want them to be happy. I want them to live with belief and to live lives where their internal sense matches their external lives. And if any of my children feel that in the Orthodox world, then I'm happy for them. I hope it won't be a rejectionist Orthodoxy that rejects those like them, that aren't like them. But I want them to, I'm comfortable with that in the same way that I'm comfortable with them choosing not to. I want them to be authentic to themselves.
You say you want your kids to live with belief. Why do you want your kids to live with belief?
Well, I don't mean belief in God. I mean belief in their lives. Belief in, I'm a vegetarian, and I believe in vegetarianism. I wouldn't impose it on anyone else, but I believe in it. For me, it means something. It's important. So I want them to have the experience of belief, of believing in the work they do, believing in the place they live, to have the experience. I want them to live, maybe I should clarify, belief is a loaded term here. I want them to live with a sense of meaning and purpose, however they choose that for themselves. I'm going to take away the word believe. I want them to live with a sense of internal integrity, that they can create, that there's not one way to live. No one owns, I was raised to think that if you aren't religious, you don't have meaning and purpose, the outside empty secular world. To know they can create meaningful community, meaningful relationships. They can feel mystery and awe. One of the things I've learned for myself in my own journey is you can belong to a community, but you can feel belonging in lots of places. I think my most meaningful experiences have been in nature, which are never part of my Orthodox world, that you can experience, you can have a deep experience of the world outside of religion. And I want them to know that they get to craft their lives for themselves.
So for you, it would not be disastrous if your kids became Orthodox. You would be happy that they were following their own path.
Right. I mean, I can feel the anxiety if it feels rejectionist, the fear of it. But I think in the same way that, what I feel like the gift my parents have ultimately given me is that I get to choose who I am. I have to give that same gift to my children. I can't be honest and say, you have the right to choose as long as it matches me, because that's my critique of so much of my religious world, right? You can choose as long as you choose this. So I give them that sense that they can choose. And you know what, the truth of parenting also is, even if I didn't give them the gift, they still have that right. They're still going to be their own people. I choose to let them be themselves.
So have your, sorry, I interrupted
okay.
you. To become what?
To be who they're going to be.
Right. How have your parents and siblings treated you in all this?
They have really been wonderful. I think for my mother especially, there's a process. I think, when we have a kid, we have a vision of who they are, of who we imagine they're going to be. And when they change, we have to create a new vision. We have to accept, oh, you're not what I thought. You're not how I thought it was going to look. And maybe there's a grieving process that happens in it. But, one of the things that has saddened me most about in my own journey and learning about people's journeys like mine is how often people are severed from their families. I want to ask, in which God's name are you cut off from your child? In which God's name did you reject a parent or a sibling? Hard for me to imagine that that there's any value or purpose in choosing ideology over a child, over a parent. And I just, I feel like my parents ultimately choose family. They haven't changed their beliefs, but they're able to make room for mine. And stories where people are cut off from family are the ones that I think break my heart the most. And I think it's common, certainly in the Orthodox world, it's common. But I just feel like what value has been upheld, what lesson has been taught by choosing that over a parent-child relationship.
So your parents and siblings have accepted you still?
They do. And I consider it a gift, one that I know you can't always count on in leaving.
Where are you now with beliefs?
People have asked me, since I started my book tour, the question and answer period is always like the nerve-wracking part now. And, people ask me what I believe in. And, I have a question mark. I certainly am connected Jewishly. I feel very connected to Jewish history and Jewish culture and Jewish tradition. Could I describe myself as a believer? I don't know. Not unless I redefined every word so many times that I'm no longer sure what they mean. I am moved by the world. I believe in meaning, and I sometimes feel a sense of mystery and awe and majesty, in nature. If I tried to twist that, could I say that's belief? I don't know. I think it's something else. I don't think you could really define it as belief.
Do you attend a synagogue weekly?
So we belong to a synagogue that meets near our house.
Reform?
It's not Reform. It's sort of traditional egalitarian. And
okay.
Whatever that, I know. So it's the one my ex-husband used to always urge me to go to. We belong to it because it's nearby and my kids have friends there. So it works socially with raising kids and wanting to have a place for holidays. We go occasionally, I would say.
So when your kids do bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, do they do that in your ex-husband's synagogue, or how does that work?
So my middle son had a bar mitzvah last year, and it was, endlessly complicated, of course, especially because he did not want to have a bar mitzvah. My middle son is the one who said to me one night, he's like, when I get older, I'm going to go downtown and sign up not to be Jewish anymore. He imagines there's like a bureau you go to fill out this form, but he did not want to have a bar mitzvah. And, I wanted him to. His father very much wanted him to, but we managed to do it. We had a very small service. We rented a place in a high school just for family. And we had an Orthodox service, which was hard for me. I felt like I was in a tough spot where it was important to my ex-husband and to his family and my family. I decided for the peace of the family, I was going to go along with it. It was hard. It felt alienating for me in a certain way. But tried to make the bar mitzvah experience be about more than just sort of the ritual observance. I really tried to talk to my son about, what it means to become, hardly a grown-up, but like an older member of a community. We did a project with a food pantry that was really meaningful to us, and tried to think about it outside of the construct of that service. But navigating religious life with, it's hard enough to be married to someone you don't believe in the same way. Being divorced from someone where you have different beliefs, it makes for, endless fun.
Super hard.
So, yeah.
How are you treated in the broader, even national or global Orthodox community? Do you feel like a pariah? Do you feel like an apostate? Are you looked down upon? Are you demonized as a public figure?
I think, it's interesting because my first two novels were Orthodox. My third was not religious at all. And then about 3 years ago, I wrote an essay that was in the New York Times about my Orthodox Jewish divorce ceremony, where I came to realize I was leaving not just this marriage, but the Orthodox world. It felt like this, outing myself for the first time. People were like, oh, we didn't know that about her. And, I had that moment of trepidation of putting my story out into the world and what it would mean to, in the most public place possible. There's no more going public with it than putting it in the New York Times. In the sense that I'm not Orthodox. And I was very nervous about reactions. And I found that the response to that essay really cut across so many religious lines. I got so many emails from people who of all religious backgrounds who are grappling with change, who are really related to it. And it's what inspired me to write my memoir. And I found, even within the Orthodox world, there was a similar reaction. I felt like there were people who, of course, were bothered by it, who felt like I'm, publicly, why do you have, one of the comments I get a lot is, why do you have to talk publicly about these things?
Exactly. Go through it yourself, but keep quiet and don't ruin it for everybody else, right?
Exactly.
So why are you doing this?
Right, exactly. It's so funny. I actually, a few months ago, I did a book club Skype with a group of Mormon women in Utah, and they told me about Mormon people who write about the Mormon world, and they said they leave it, but they can't leave it alone. Yeah, I think was what they said. Right. And I said, it's funny because in the Orthodox world, I am one of those people, like, you don't know that because you don't feel bothered by it in the same way. But, the reason to, first of all, there are lots of reasons to write publicly about it. I think the more interesting question is, why do people not want it to be written publicly about? And I think it's because it goes against the story. The story is we're happy. And if you want to quietly slink away, then nothing has to challenge our notion that there is one story to tell. And, even recently I got this little rebuke from an editor of a New Jersey Jewish newspaper for an essay I wrote in the New York Times a few weeks ago about, it was in the Modern Love section, about taking my son for a piece of non-kosher pizza. And, she said, one of the things she said was, if you have these thoughts, you should write them in a diary like in the old days. And I was like, right. If I have these thoughts, those are quiet. No one needs to know. And publicly, you should write the version where everyone is happy, right? Everyone is Orthodox. Because that, of course, can be told publicly. I mean, no one is saying don't tell the religious version publicly. That is perfect for public consumption. And the reason that no one wants these other voices is because they threaten the story. They threaten the version that there's only one way to live. And they are dangerous because they tell people that you're not the only one. And, it's actually interesting. One of the responses I got to this Modern Love essay, I got responses from all religious backgrounds. I got a response from a man in a Mormon community who told me he was getting divorced and that he had showed the essay to his parents because it helped explain his experience. And I think the value of talking about these things is it contradicts the public version that there's one way to live. It insists there are many ways to be, and there are lots of us who feel this way. And even those of us sitting quietly in synagogue or in church, there are lots of us who are questioning. And that, I think, is why people don't want it to be told. The reason to tell it is because it's true. It's true of the world. It's true of how so many of us live.
So there's this infamous quote in Mormonism that not all things that are true are useful. And right. I'm just going to push back, not from my own values, but from the people that tell me to shut up, basically.
Right.
And the idea is, it may be true. Yes, there are people being hurt, but your religion's been around for millennia. It's the core of so many people's identity, their families, their sense of meaning and purpose in the world. And you're harming that. You're harming this infrastructure that lives are based on. And Tova, the more you speak out, there's going to be more doubt. There's going to be more questioning. You're going to weaken this institution that has meant so much to so many people for so long. It's going to lead to divorce and sadness. And you're basically pulling the threads on the fabric of society that keeps people moral, keeps people happy, keeps people with a sense of meaning and purpose. You're hurting people. That's the argument.
Right. I hear it in the same way. Believe me, I've heard it many a time. What I would say is you're asking people to construct a lie. You're asking people to uphold a fantasy for your purposes. And I would have to, I think you have to take apart the purposes. You want to uphold something that to me doesn't seem true. And so you are asking for sort of, I think we do this in lots of places, right? We uphold an ideology. We uphold a construction notion of what's true. And the people you're harming are the individuals inside that who feel they can't live truthfully or authentically. You're precluding the possibility of people coming to their own truths in order to uphold your version of the truth. And, I hear the idea that, that truth is hard and it was hard, though. It's not really, I don't think it's just about truth. I think it's about the notion of individual difference. The idea that lots of people experience the same thing in different ways. And I think what really the goal in trying to silence the stories is about trying to say there's one version. And what the hope is if I say it enough times, you will change so that you adhere to the version. And if you adhere, maybe someone else will hear, until we all adhere to this version. But, maybe where is the possibility to save the world? How does that work as a response?
Tova, you broke up just at the end there. So
Okay.
would you mind summarizing that point again? I'm sorry to make you do that. That was beautiful. You just broke up right at the end.
Sure. I think that the damage is done by insisting to people there's one story. I think the psychological damage is enormous, as evidenced by people who leave, the sense of trauma people feel in leaving, the sense that we are being told there's one way to be, and if you don't match that, there's something wrong with you. And the other thing about that, that I also would want to say is, talking about people who don't believe doesn't endanger the whole endeavor. Religious faith can encompass lots of things. Religious culture can make room for people who don't believe. Everyone who leaves is not leaving in order to tear down. And I'd love to think, one of the things I think about my memoir is, when people ask me how it's read in the Orthodox world, I'd want to say that I think that, I hope it's a call to a religious world to ask how we deal with difference. How do we deal with the fact that not everyone believes as we do? Because it's true, whether you like it or not, it's true. Not everyone believes as we do. And we have a choice to make. As a religious community has a choice to make as well about how it wants to deal with those who don't believe. Does it want to turn its back? Does it want to demonize or shun? Or can religious communities be secure enough in their own beliefs to say, I believe this, I accept that you don't, that's also okay.
But if somebody says the beauty and the power is so profound that these little intellectual or faith or integrity concerns you have, or concerns about the minority for whom it doesn't work, none of that matters when compared to the power and the strength and the value of the orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And so the cost is not worth the benefit. Just be quiet.
Right. I guess I would say the power and the beauty and the strength to whom? To the believer, yes, it is power and strength and beauty, tradition. To the non-believer, it's not power and strength and beauty. To the non-believer, it's a prison. And so that's, I think that people want to believe that belief is objective, but belief is a subjective experience that someone feels. And for someone who believes, I think it's a wonderful thing for them. In some ways, I feel like if you're born into a world that you believe in, how lucky you are. If you're born into a world that matches you, consider it a gift. But can you make room inside that to recognize that not everyone has that? Not everyone is born into a world that matches them. And not everyone belief is not provable. You can't prove it. So you experience it. That's great, but not everyone does. And where do you make room for those of us who don't?
Oh, I want to keep going. The book is The Book of Separation, Tova Mirvis. Listen, Mormon Stories listeners, don't hang up yet. What we're going to do is we're all going to go buy this book. We're going to have 10,000 copies of this book purchased over the next month. We're all going to read it. And then in a month, Tova, we're going to have you back on Mormon Stories, and we're going to let our listeners ask you questions. We're going to celebrate this beautiful book, and we're going to bring you to Salt Lake City. And
Definitely.
we're gonna give you a wonderful experience here in Salt Lake City. What do you think?
It sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you reading the book, and it's great talking to you. It's so interesting how similar how we come from such a similar place. Even in your questions, I hear how much there is in common between our worlds.
You have no idea, and we're going to explore that. Okay. But thank you for this beautiful gift of a book. I don't want to minimize you by saying you're a modern day Chaim Potok, because you're a modern day Tova Mirvis, but you're doing incredibly important work, not just to Orthodox Jews, but to people all over the world. And so bless you, Tova. You're brilliant, you're thoughtful, you're sensitive. And all my listeners are writing how much they've loved this experience. So
thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Stay in touch. We're going to have you back, and good luck with everything.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good luck with your interview. I'm going to say bye to my listeners really quick, but you can hang up if you want.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
All right, thanks, Tova.
Sure,
listeners, thank you so much for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Please stay tuned for more. We're releasing the Michael Quinn interview today. for those who are donors. So if you're a member of Patreon, patreon.com/Mormon Stories, or if you are just a regular donor, you'll be able to access the Michael Quinn interview today. There's a Facebook group called Open Stories Foundation Donors that you can join only if you're a donor in the past year, and you can get access to those interviews early. We're going to be offering new and exciting things through Patreon and through the Open Stories Foundation Donors Facebook group. So thanks to all of you who support us. You can go to mormonstories.org, click on the donation button, 10, 20, 25, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. Keeps the Open Stories Foundation going, keeps us alive, and allows us to continue providing this sort of stuff for you. So please support us if you are able. If you're not, we still give these interviews away for free. So thank you for listening one way or the other. Other ways that you can support Mormon Stories: you can like our Facebook page at Mormon Stories Podcast on Facebook. You can give us a positive review on Facebook at Mormon Stories Podcast. You can also give us a positive review on iTunes. So please go to iTunes and give a positive review to Mormon Stories Podcast. We want to thank everyone who makes this possible: Amy Grubbs, Cody Layton, Sharon Price, our staff at the Open Stories Foundation. Please know that your donations allow us to have a staff and to run as a legitimate nonprofit. Please know that your donations are tax deductible and they go towards the mission of the foundation, that we're doing all we can to support people who are experiencing religious transition. We have other podcasts at Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters, Mormon Mental Health, Mormon Transitions. Look for more podcasts there as well. And just know that we're here to do whatever we can to support you guys. So please email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. If you are in a mixed faith marriage and you want us to tell your story, we would love to feature more mixed faith relationships in the coming month or two. That's going to be a new series we have. So please reach out if you're in a mixed faith marriage and you want to tell your story. Know how grateful we are. We're also grateful to our board of directors: Lee Stowell, Roger McComber, Craig Woodfield, Steve Holman, Steve Holbrook, Kim Turner, and Nadine McCombs Hansen. Couldn't exist without our board, so we're thankful for them as well. We love all you as listeners. Please tune in again soon on Mormon Stories for more episodes. Please buy this book, The Book of Separation by Tova Mirvis. And please look forward to our future interview and our visit to Salt Lake City, hopefully from Tova. Thanks again for everyone. Sure appreciate you tuning in live on Facebook. To those who have tuned in live, and please tune in again soon for another episode of Mormon Stories. And check out our events at mormonstories.org/events. Thanks, everybody. Take care and see you all very soon. Sure appreciate the support.